Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing a Retro Cup team that I had great results with between yesterday and today's sets that does not need Furret. This team is built around Maccargo being an unexpected Corebreaker to a lot of teams. Now, Maccargo does pretty well into Furret being able to offset Trailblaze boosts with Rock Tomb debuffs. It obviously completely destroys Jump Pluff, and in the zeros against Grumpig, it can actually survive a Dynamic Punch. Now, I ran this team up to a high of 3308 ELO, which at the time of recording was top 30 in the world. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches. Hopping into game number 1, we have a bit of an interesting lead Maccargo into Toxapex. How I like to play this lead is throwing 3 Incinerates and then safe switching into Grumpig. Opponent responds with a Furret, and this is incredibly good for me. Up even just a little bit of energy, this is such a comfortable matchup for the Grumpig. As Grumpig, I don't have to shield. Opponent is going to go for the Trailblaze to boost up their damage, but look at this. I make another Dynamic Punch on very low HP. My opponent is forced to double shield, and just like that, I now have an entire move banked on Maccargo and a 2-0 shield advantage. In comes the Shadow Primeape. I take big damage from the Swift, but I will make the Ice Punch and I'm able to pick up the knockout, and I'm trusting in 2-shield Maccargo to take home this win. Back in comes the Toxapex. I switch into Maccargo and I immediately apply a debuff with Rock Tomb. They're forced to switch out into Arctibax, and Arctibax will get outpaced here as I make Rock Tomb number 2. Rock Tomb alternates 3 and 2 cycles. My opponent gets a Dragon Claw, but I see the path to victory. My opponent cannot beat me if they cannot land a charge move, because due to the rock subtyping, they're never going to be able to poison jab down. So they're forced to try and get to 3 brines, but with the energy that I already have on this Maccargo, I'm going to get to 2 Rock Tombs before they get to 3 brines, so this game is going to end in a win. Maccargo is getting a little bit low due to the poison jabs, but we're okay. We're back on that Rock Tomb 2 cycle, so even though on paper Toxapex seems like a bit of a core breaker, we're able to secure the game 1 win. We see an unbelievably good lead in the next match, Maccargo into Shadow Typhlosion, and the Shadow Typhlosion is not switching out. This means my opponent is incredibly weak to Maccargo somewhere in the back. As this matchup, Typhlosion gets absolutely crushed. So, as the Maccargo player, you can play it out like this. You don't have to commit a shield, and you can force both shields from your opponent. They go for the Thunder Punch. I can now force both shields, which if I do, I'm immediately sending in Grumpig, or I just win switch and shield advantage. They send in Annihilate, I hard pivot into the Grumpig, and their final Pokemon is revealed to be Jump Pluff. Knowing what I know now, I actually wish that I had conceded the farm down and let Maccargo get farmed, and that way I could have had Grumpig on the Annihilate and Shadow Primeape on the Jump Pluff. Now, Jump Pluff as the regular is more difficult for Shadow Primeape because obviously the Ice Punch doesn't one-shot, but I still should be in a pretty nice position overall. A Shadow Ball is going to grab the shields from my opponent. They're going to need to throw multiple charge attacks at the Grumpig because they're not the Shadow, and with a shield up, I should just be able to win the game with the Shadow Primeape anyway. So even though I did give up switch, I should still be pretty okay. Aerial Ace will pick up the knockout. In comes the Shadow Primeape. They throw a Fairy Wind before switching, and all I have to do is make it to the back-to-back Rage Fist. So Rage Fist is going to connect. That's big damage onto the Annihilate. Here my opponent actually turn waits. As you see there, I was going to do one more end catch. They turn wait to avoid that catch, but now I can just farm up till 1 off the back-to-back Rage Fist, safe in the knowledge that I am not in 1 Fairy Wind range. As Fairy Wind from a non-Shadow Jump Pluff, not going to do a lot of damage, and we're going to be able to take this win as Primeape knocks out Jump Pluff with the heavily boosted Rage Fist. We move to the next match, and what a lead. Maccargo staring down Jump Pluff. They throw a Fairy Wind, defer the Incinerate onto the Shadow Charizard. This is a Dragon Breath Charizard, but even so, this is not a good answer to Maccargo. I get to immediately grab a shield and apply a debuff, and now I'm just going to send in Grumpig. The important thing is that I kept a lot of HP on the Maccargo, because health on Maccargo is going to be very valuable, because I can use that to waste energy from the Jump Pluff. I'm just going straight for a Dynamic Punch here. I just want the Shadow Charizard gone before I can potentially make it to another Blast Burn, and now they're going to bring back in the Jump Pluff. This is, of course, the non-Shadow Jump Pluff, so it's not going to take a lot of damage from Shadow Ball, but it's also not going to deal a lot of damage as well. The nice thing here is they are below half HP, and I know that I can survive in acrobatics. Opponent is going to go for the acrobatics. That is going to get me quite low. I'm able to make a last-second Shadow Ball. Grumpig barely hanging on, and I'm able to get the opponent quite low. I bring in Maccargo. As you see there, I waited the turn to see if they'd switch because I didn't want to be 5 turns behind with whatever they had in the back. And in the back, oh no, they were just triple weak to Maccargo. And sometimes you will run into teams like this where people are just unprepared for Maccargo, and Maccargo can just put in way too much work. I'm able to debuff their Incinerates and get the shield, and now I can just clean up with the Shadow Primeape. Shadow Primeape will get a nice Karate Chop down after the Rage Fist lands, and we're able to take the win. Picking up a good lead in the next match, Maccargo into Furret. Maccargo wins the 0s and the 1s versus Furret straight Rock Tomb, so you don't even have to go for an overheat unless you're trying to pick up a surprise KO. So my opponent here is going to go for the Trailblaze. They save switch into Grumpig, and this is honestly a little bit tricky because I don't have a good response to a Grumpig save switch with this team. So I'm just going to stay in with Maccargo and just unleash Rock Tomb after Rock Tomb. Rock Tomb number 2 is going to be shielded up by my opponent. I'm staying in this matchup here. Maccargo able to make a last-second Rock Tomb there, barely hanging on, forcing the final shield. My goodness, now I can just bring in my Grumpig. I do get denied there, but I am going to let this through. It is going to be a blind dynamic punch, and now in comes Furret. And I should be in a pretty nice position now that I have the Shadow Primeape. A Shadow Primeape at an advantage is very strong, even though I don't know what's in the back yet. So I am going to overfarm, playing the charge attack priority, and I will fire off the double resisted Rage Fist because it will be enough to KO. In the back, that's about the worst thing that I could see. It is going to be the Oranguru, but since I already boosted up my Ice Punches, I can just wait to watch the confusion start. This Ice Punch will be able to pick up the knockout, and then all that's left is the incredibly low health Grumpig. We move to the next match, and it's actually the same lead as last game, so leading the Maccargo into Furret. Last Furret didn't really stay in here. Furret, if they are able to no-shield the Rock Tomb, I am forced to throw again. So here, I'm going to try and go for a little bit of a sneaky play here. Looking just to pick up the knockout. Overheat into the Furret. Furret does shield it. That forces me out into Primeape. Out comes another Oranguru. Oranguru does not do much in this meta, as it just loses to Grumpig. But the one thing it can do is it can do well into Shadow Primeape. Here my opponent is going to realize that they can't farm down. They're forced to fire off the Brutal Swing, and now I send in Grumpig. Grumpig, I'm going to need a ton of energy if I want a chance to win this game, so I am going to be committed to shield as they go for the Brutal Swing. Here, I'm going to farm up a ton, and I'm going to switch right before they get the move to get a catch and sneak onto Maccargo. I'm doing everything I can. I'm fighting back in this game. The decision to go for the overheat proved to be a terrible decision by me, as shielding the overheat made me switch out of what's a winning matchup. So that is a mistake that I am going to learn from here and not throw overheats against Furret. Here my opponent shields, which gives me hope that it's something weak in the back to Grumpig. Dynamic Punch will pick up the KO, but it's a non-Shadow Jumpluff. If it's the Shadow Jumpluff, I can win this game because I just do more damage. But this is a rare instance where the non-Shadow Jumpluff will actually be preferable for my opponent. My only win con in this game is calling a terrible Aerial Ace bait, so I will no shield, but my opponent knows they can win it straight acrobatics, so they will do exactly that. Maccargo into Talonflame, a dream lead for Maccargo. Opponent save switches into Furret, and I'm going to stay in here with the Maccargo for now. Maccargo doesn't really have to switch out of this matchup, and my backline isn't terrible into the Talonflame either, as Grumpig does very fine, and Shadow Primeape, as long as a bunch of shields aren't up, can outpace quite significantly. Here my opponent is going to make one final Trailblaze. This is where I have to trust my Maccargo IVs, but I barely hang on. I'm just looking to pivot out no matter what gets brought in here. My opponent is going to bring out a Sucker Punch Lycanroc. Look at the spice. I think that's Lycanroc Midday, if I'm not mistaken. An incredibly cool pick from my opponent, but look at Lycanroc Midday just getting melted. Oh my goodness, these Psywaves are shredding this thing. They're going to go for the Trailblaze, looking to boost up. I'm going to wait down my timer, and then in comes Primeape. There's going to be the switch to Talonflame. I should have thrown on 6 there, as throwing on 8 is slightly suboptimal timing, but either way, I am just in a winning position here, because this next Rage Fist is going to force my opponent to commit the final shield, and then I have a guaranteed win con of doing one Karate Chop and the Snipe with Maccargo. So Maccargo is going to be able to knock out with the Rock Tomb there. they're going to be able to farm down with the Lichen Rock, but I'm one off the move with the Shadow Primeape, so we are able to take that game. Things got a little bit scary there as I didn't really know what Midnight Lichen Rock had as a moveset, but we are able to get the win. We're going up against a fellow content creator, Chillis FM, leading Maccargo into Arctivax. Pretty decent lead for us. Opponent is going to make a nice catch, catching the Rock Tomb onto a Grumpig safe swap. Grumpig safe swap, again, very awkward for this backline. I'm going to fire off another Rock Tomb and just look to try and be a nuisance. But the Grumpig is just going to fully let itself go, so the Grumpig is going to get knocked out, and I'm just looking to pivot into my own Grumpig, and now in comes Arctivax. Arctivax is going to be firing off energy here, going for the Icy Wind. I will be able to make a Dynamic Punch, and I wasn't patient, and I let him catch Dynamic Punch onto a Dusclops, and that instantly loses me the game because I'm just going to get farmed here. I can make a Shadow Ball, but this is the easiest shield ever because Dusclops is going to exit so healthy with a ton of energy, and now I just can't win this game. That was just a really sloppy play by me, and I included it because it is a battle against a friend, but I also just wanted to show that even players who battle on the leaderboards can have games where they just really throw the game, and that was one where if I was just more patient, I would have been in a much better position. And as the Primeape, I'm just going to get so severely outpaced here. There's just already another move on the Dusclops. I know that I can't afford to shield everything, but the moment a move lands, then you can eventually just switch into the Arctivax and farm me down. I throw 2 and the move here, hoping he will let it go, but he will just end up shielding, safe in the knowledge that he can just take this game. He has a move on the Arctivax. I predict the switch in here, so I'm able to deny Arctivax energy, but I would need the Dusclops to be dry to win, and the Dusclops just had way too much energy. So that's a game where I think if I play cleaner, I have a shot at winning, but letting him catch that Dynamic Punch removed any ability for me to win. Now, this is a battler who I played earlier in the video. I went for the overheat against their Furret. They shielded, and it completely threw off this team's momentum. So I actually get a rematch later in the day, and this time, I am looking to learn from my mistake. They Trailblaze, I'm going for the Rock Tomb. Even if they call the Rock Tomb, it's fine because I can outpace and still win the zeros. The only way this matchup gets bad is if I overheat. So I just need to not overheat against Furret. Now I get to fire off this Rock Tomb, opponent lets it go, and look at how nice this matchup is for the Maccargo. Maccargo is able to get a shield advantage, and now I can send in Primeape. There's a pivot out into a Jumpluff, and Jumpluff is going to be really sad when it sees double super effective Ice Punch. Ice Punch into the Jumpluff. They do respect it, but I'm very okay staying in here because as long as I land this Ice Punch, my opponent is going to be in a really tough spot. As Ice Punch, it won't knock out because of the regular, but it just removes way too much of their health. So Ice Punch is going to land. I try for an Aerial Ace catch, but my opponent is going to be able to fire off the Acrobatics. I'm going to be shielding up the Acrobatics as that's a pretty hard-hitting move. In the back is a Rangaroo, and a Rangaroo just does not win this matchup. So this game is going to end in a win. Dynamic Punch is going to land, and as we see, Dynamic Punch plus the Psywaves is able to two-shot, and my opponent has slightly slower pacing with Brutal Swing than I have to Dynamic Punch, so this will be a very straightforward game. As we get to pick up the knockout with the Dynamic Punch, and we get to learn from our misplay earlier in the day, and my opponent is going to resign the match. We move to the next match, seeing a familiar lead and a pretty decent one for the Maccargo leading into Arctivax. Arctivax is going to strike first here, firing off a Dragon Claw, and I'm very okay tanking this Dragon Claw because I know it's something Maccargo can survive. And now I will look to fire off the Rock Tomb, really looking to ramp up the pressure on this Arctivax. Arctivax is going to no shield, and they will get KO'd. I'm one away from the next Rock Tomb. Opponent is going to send in Grumpig, and Grumpig is going to be immediately chipped down with a Rock Tomb. Rock Tomb is no shield that I send in my own Grumpig. They're going to switch into Dusclops, and this is a core that we're actually seeing a few times now. It is going to be the Arctivax plus Dusclops core. Here I go for a bait because I know that I'm going to need to catch back up, and that's one way to do so, as the Dusclops is highly incentivized to end up shielding. They're forced to throw again, and now I have to decide, do I decide to save 2 shields for the Shadow Primeape? I say yes. I send in the Primeape. Unfortunately, I do get 1 turn bring in, so I'm not able to throw on the greatest timing there just because of the game. Now, in comes Grumpig. I still have 2 shields, but I'm going to lose with both shields remaining here as the Psywaves are just too oppressive. So I saved all my shields, but it's just not going to amount to anything as I get farmed down, and I will concede the match. Hopping into the final match, it's a disastrous lead leading into Shadow Primeape. I safe switch into Grumpig, and I'm always okay to absorb energy here because I trade tanking a charge move in exchange for a lot of Psywave damage. When Dugong is switched in, that's a pretty big surprise because Dugong has a very poor matchup into Grumpig. Grumpig obviously can hit for massive super effective damage with Dynamic Punch, but it appears my opponent's plan is going to be to tank one, shield one, farm all the way down, and then threaten double super effective drill runs onto Maccargo. But here's the thing about Maccargo. Maccargo has a lot of bulk. So even though this is a double super effective drill run, I can no shield this. Maccargo is going to survive. They're forced to throw again. I'm going to be no shielding as well. And I'm just saving 2 shields for Shadow Primeape. The Icy Wind, it doesn't knock out. They're going to bring in their own Primeape. But I get to the Rage Fist first. And this Rage Fist is going to be no shielded. They get KO'd in the back. They have their own Maccargo. And I have a guaranteed win condition by just throwing as soon as I get the move. Because this is going to force my opponent's shield because I'm just dealing way too much damage. And now I can make it to another Rage Fist. So my opponent having a very similar team idea with the Shadow Primeape plus Maccargo core. But my Shadow Primeape was able to sweep in the endgame. All in all, I really like this team. I had good results with it, and I think it is a pretty solid climbing team for the current Retro Cup meta. I do think that a few weaknesses the team has is specifically Grumpig safe swap is a little bit uncomfortable, and if you end up seeing a Feraligatr anywhere that isn't on the Primeape, it's probably going to be a loss. So far, I haven't seen a lot of Feraligatr, and the Grumpig safe swaps I've kind of been able to work around by basically trading Maccargo health in exchange for an overheat knockout or a shield advantage, and then trying to play from there. But if Feraligatr does pick up a lot in usage, then I could see this team being less effective, but for now, the team felt very, very strong. Even if it was leading into other water types, like we did have some games leading into Toxapex and stuff like that, being able to bank energy on the Maccargo and Maccargo's ability to consistently debuff every 15-10 turns really felt strong, and I'm just very happy that I get to use Maccargo because it is a Pokemon that I really enjoy. So to have it be an actually really good meta pick for gaining ELO, especially doing a good job at shutting down a lot of those Furret, Jumpluff teams, I think does give it a lot of merit. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoy watching content like this, please do consider leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is genuinely so appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.